Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Kwasiborski Show, calling you live and direct from Prague, Czech Republic, the heart of Central Europe, and a beautiful spring day here in Prague with temperatures reaching close to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and for all you fans of Celsius, around 22 degrees with the sun shining. Definitely a beautiful fall day. Feels more like spring, so we're not complaining here in October, as this is the 6th of October, 2018. We're here to start looking at a bit of the Philadelphia sports scene. The NFL, the Major League Baseball playoffs have tipped off, as well did the NHL season, which is very important here in Prague, where ice hockey is the big national sport. But before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people first. This would be the internet. I'd like to thank all for being invented. I'd like to thank Al Gore for inventing it. And, of course, listen to all my loyal listeners around the league. And the big thing is I've been off the air for quite a while. I've been doing some traveling back home to the United States. Then I had a best friend visit me here in Central Europe. We met in Vienna and continued all the way to Prague. And this week, just kind of getting back into the swing of things with work and wrapping up the end of September, going into the beginning of October, and all the work stuff that I have to do there. So it's been off the air for a while, but I'm back. It's a Saturday. It's beautiful here. Prague is sort of a late city, so on the weekends, so not much has happened until about later in the afternoon. So after this, I will definitely get my butt out of the flat and out into this wonderful, beautiful weather. But as it is, it's always a sports show. I like to talk about Philadelphia Eagles, Philadelphia Phillies, looking around the NFL, looking around Major League Baseball, and all the wonderful things that have happened. And I think the typical theme of this week's show is mental preparation, mental statuses within the game, where the players' heads are at, and how the mental aspect affects the team. And how the mental aspect is just as important as the game plan, preparation, and things of these sorts. The Philadelphia Eagles, I predicted, would be 4-0 at this point of the season. We all thought that the first 4 games, or the first 25% of the season, would be the easiest. It turns out it was not. Each game was highly competitive, if not they weren't very good, fun games to watch. They were very competitive, and they all came down to the wire. It's a little bit disheartening to be 2-2 at this point, when I thought they'd be 4-0, 3-1 at worst. I thought their 2 losses would have been to, if they had a chance to lose, would have been to Atlanta opening day. And then, of course, I thought they would lose the game to Tennessee if I had to choose one of the 4. And yeah, they did lose to Tennessee, and they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the week 2, which I think was, they were just completely outplayed by Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay came out. It was almost like if you watch boxing, Tampa Bay came out, landed an uppercut with their first punch. By the time the Eagles regained the situation, they were hit with another huge punch to the body or to the face on the O.J. Howard touchdown with lack of poor tackling. The Eagles could just never rebound and were clearly outplayed by a Tampa Bay team that was prepared for the Eagles situation. But the Tennessee game, I don't know. I looked at this game. I thought they would... Going into the game, I know Tennessee had a great defense. I know Carson Wentz, our franchise quarterback, was only his second game back from the devastating knee injury that he suffered. And Marcus Mariota, the quarterback, was coming off a concussion and he had trouble feeling the ball and having feeling in his fingers, and he had a bit of, I guess, of a strained elbow. And when you think of a quarterback with a strained elbow or shoulder, you feel like they won't be able to throw a deep ball with any sort of accuracy or velocity. That was not the case. Marcus Mariota had probably his best NFL regular season game that I've ever seen him play. And I think some would argue that was one of his best ever. People that have watched him play throughout his career in the NFL. I don't want to take away. I think him beating the Chiefs single-handedly in the playoffs last year was probably his best game and best victory, obviously, in the playoffs, and especially on the road in Kansas City. But this game, he just looked like complete control. He struggled at times, like all quarterbacks do, against the Eagles' pass rush. But the one thing was that he understood how to neutralize the pass rush of the Eagles. He would either take off running, which many quarterbacks are doing now against the Eagles when the pass rush closes real in. The quarterbacks this year are not afraid to take off running. You saw Ryan Fitzpatrick do it. You saw not so much Andrew Luck. He's not really a runner at any stretch of the imagination, but he did run a few times, and then Matt Ryan will scramble as well. But Marcus Mariota is clearly the better running quarterbacks of the 4 quarterbacks the Eagles faced, and would run for some get some great yardages, would pick up some key first downs, as well as when the pressure was coming, he would just step up on the pocket, move around a little bit, would get shifty a little bit in there, and would throw the ball with complete confidence. And what's surprising is that the Tennessee receiving corps is there's just no names on that team. We made Craig Davis look like an all-pro with 161 yards in the air, catching, and he also catch the game-winning touchdown. But really, to me, it's just the mental preparation just wasn't there. The mental strength of the Eagles team just does not look there early on. I know they're dealing with some key injuries to players. You got some very key people bouncing back from injuries, but you also just have some new people entering in the rotations, especially along the defensive line. But to me, the weakest point is the Eagles secondary, and it really has me down going into this week's game against Minnesota. I do not have faith in the Eagles defense right now, just the ability to stop teams. When I started this podcast, the first one that we did earlier, I said the key to the Eagles was the secondary's ability to tackle, limit the yards after the catch, and ability to tackle teams or receivers, I guess, on third down and stop the first downs from happening. And that has been completely lost this season. It looks like the old Jim Johnson defense, where Jim Johnson, great coordinator, fantastic person, almost a Hall of Fame coordinator, knew how to play against certain quarterbacks and scheme against them. But his philosophy was give up as many yards between the 20s or between the red zones, and we'll figure out how to stop them at key moments. And every game this year, besides the Tampa Bay game, 3 out of 4 games have come down to the opposing teams having the ball within the Eagles' 20 in the last seconds of the game, in the last minutes of the game, and almost the last seconds. And you can't keep playing like that. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. And so far, the Eagles have been fortunate enough to win 2 of those games against Atlanta and Indianapolis, but they're 2 games they should have easily lost as well. This philosophy is bend but don't break. Is not a good philosophy for any defense to have, because you cannot consistently think the Eagles are just going to stop the team in the red zone with the game on the line. They can't keep up giving big plays, key first downs. The defensive line, I think, has looked great this year. It's clearly the strength, but they cannot get the key sack. They cannot get the key turnover. Last week, Brandon Graham had a chance to recover a fumble. He didn't. If he recovers that fumble, the game is over. And these are the games. But if you go back to the Super Bowl, Brandon Graham was also one that strip sacked Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. And that allowed the Eagles, that was a key moment of the game that set up to the Hail Mary pass, which is almost impossible to complete. Not impossible, but almost impossible to complete. And that was a key moment. And this defense isn't stepping up to get that key strip sack, to get that fumble recovery. And then in the overtime, and even marching down in the fourth quarter and the overtime, they're giving up 4th down conversions. Whether it's 4th and 3, there's a 4th and 17, and they give up, 19 yards. That is when it comes down to the mental strength of the team. They're not out of position. Backup safety Corey Graham, a guy that I talked about on the first podcast as well. I was like, yeah, he's a great backup. He's a guy that, okay, if you need a spot start here or 2 because of injuries, but he's not a guy that you can count on to play an entire game or an entire season. The depth of safety was the issue for the Eagles, and I talked about them maybe taking a chance on Eric Reed if something happened to either Malcolm Jenkins or Rodney McLeod. We all know Rodney McLeod's out for the season after touring his knee ligaments against Indianapolis, which kind of looked like a bruise, really. His Jalen Mills went to tackle him into his knee. His helmet went into his knee. It just looked like a severe bruise, but here he tore a ligament. He's out for the year. I wanted the Eagles to sign Eric Reed. Alas, the Carolina Panthers beat the Philadelphia Eagles in signing Eric Reed or the rest of the league, and it showed. Rodney McLeod's not out of position on 4th and 17 with the game on the line. It's the plays like that where you give up these conversions consistently that wear down defenses and give the other team confidence. I don't care about the strategy. Let them get to the 20. We'll stop them. I don't care about that. They did not stop the Tennessee Titans, a team with a no-name receiver record. They have 2 players on offense I can name, and that's Marcus Mariota and Travis Henry. And then they also have Dion Lewis, the ex-Eagle. But that's about it. Their key receiver from last year, the tight end, who was Marcus Mariota's failsafe. His name's even escaping me right now, and I had him on fantasy last year. Their other receiver, Chris Grisham, asked to be released last week. Gilchrist asked to be released last week, and he was. And some guy named Corey Davis steps up. You just cannot give up these big plays, and that's what this Eagles team is going to. They're reverting back to the 2017 season. Actually, that would have been last year, 2016 season, where they're just giving up big play after big plays in the secondary. You saw this starting to happen last year towards the last quarter of the season. Look, every team's going to give up points to the Rams. Eagles gave up 35. I expected that. But they gave up 29 against the Giants, who were struggling all year. To give up that many points against them, it was awful for the Eagles to do. And you start to see teams are figuring out this defense. And right now, I don't have a lot of faith because it comes to mental stops, mental making mistakes. It's just able to recover that fumble when need to be. It's able to bring down the quarterback instead of just getting to him, hurrying him, but then the quarterback escapes pressure and runs for a first down, or escapes pressure and throws, a little short pass for a first down, or throws a pass across the field. They have to start making these plays. They have to start not only getting to the quarterback, sacking him, but they need to sack him in key moments. The secondary has to stop missing tackles. That missing tackles is clearly a mental situation. It's a mental part. When the receiver catches the ball, you don't tackle up high. You go for waist or legs low. You see Ronald Darby missing tackles. You see Jalen Mills considering to keep getting beat on passes over the middle that are turning into long gains or double moves. He's susceptible to that, and teams are picking up on him. Eventually, you have to stop these things. You have to step up, especially on the road. You're going to have to win on the road, and you're going to have to win within the conference. And I'm sorry, I look at Minnesota's offense. I look at a more desperate Minnesota team coming into the Lincoln Financial Field with great receivers, Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen on the outside, Kyle Rudolph, a great tight end, over the middle, and you have Kirk Cousins, who has a history of success against the Eagles. Kirk Cousins is 4-3 against the Eagles, with 2 losses coming last year. But I've seen Kirk Cousins shred this Eagles defense when they had 2 great outside receivers, when they had Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, and Jordan Reed over the middle, or Vernon Davis over the middle. And I see the same thing coming again. I just don't have the faith right now that this Eagles front 4 will step up and get the key turnover, get the key sack, or the secondary will let interceptions bounce off their hands, or they will miss tackles, or they'll keep being susceptible to double moves. I just don't have that faith right now, and I think it's all mental. They have to start tackling better. Within its third down, it's 3rd and 7, the defense has done its job up to there. Usually the front 4 stops them in a run, maybe stops a short pass. Then the secondary and the linebackers have to step up. If the defensive line is getting pressure on 3rd down, they got to disrupt. They have to not just disrupt the rhythm, but make sure the quarterback goes down, make sure the quarterback stays on his spots, and isn't moved too much, because when the quarterbacks start moving around, the defensive front 4 has to chase them, but it brings the defense up, and the quarterbacks, like a Kirk Cousins, will find the person in the zone for that key first down. They just have to come up with key sacks, key stops. They got to really step up their game, and they cannot live off the fact that they play great defense at home, which is the case. They're playing fantastic defense at home, and they have played fantastic defense at home dating all the way back to 2016 when it was Jim Schwartz and Doug Peterson's first year. They have, but eventually at home though, they've gotten lucky this year against Atlanta and Indianapolis. The defense has allowed 2 great quarterbacks to get inside the red zone with the game on the line and under 3-4 minutes to play. And if somehow Matt Ryan or Andrew Luck were able to get that game-winning touchdown, the Eagles had no time on the clock to mount even a comeback. That left 4th down play against Indianapolis, I think, was with 25 seconds left. And against the Atlanta Falcons, that was literally the last play of the game. I mean, you just cannot keep living like that. So their Eagles defense, while it's limited those quarterbacks to limited yardage and played well against them, they still cannot allow these quarterbacks to get down, like a Kirk Cousins, who has familiarity of playing within the link, more so than Andrew Luck and even Matt Ryan. Kirk Cousins is used to going into the link and winning at the link. This is a revenge game for the Vikings. Not only do they want to win the game, they want to exact revenge on the Eagles team. I think Minnesota has also some issues with their mental ability and their confidence, I should say. It's all about confidence, really. This Minnesota defense is coming off a brutal loss to the Buffalo Bills at home, which was shocking. I think was the greatest upset in NFL history, or at least since 1995 with the points on the line. The Minnesota Vikings were favored to win the game against Buffalo by 16.5 points. And they got blown out by 19. They lost 26-7. Then last week, the Los Angeles Rams, with their high-powered offense, goes into Minnesota and shreds that defense. The secondary for Minnesota is also suffering, much like the Eagles' defense. It's not as good as it seems to be or was last year. And I think the Eagles set the blueprint on this Minnesota defense on how to beat it in the NFC Championship game. They scored 31 points against the Minnesota Vikings with a backup quarterback, Nick Foles, who, he caught lightning in a bottle. Say what you will, it doesn't matter. Nick Foles shredded the Minnesota defense. They could not stop us on third down. They could not stop the long passes, the flea flicker and things like this. They just couldn't do it. And the Eagles' confidence on offense and defense especially was sky high that day. And right now the Eagles' defense is not playing with that confidence. They have to play with that confidence that they played against Minnesota. They played against Atlanta. They played against, I don't know how much confidence they had against the Patriots, but they were able to make some key stops there early on. The Eagles defense needs to make those key plays. The Patrick Robinson interception for a touchdown. That was the first point scored by the Eagles to tie the game at 7-7, and that set the whole setting for the game. Sorry, haven't done a podcast in a while. Set the tone for the entire game. That wasn't even an offensive touchdown, but that's what the Eagles defense need. They have to be opportunistic. They got to get turnovers. They got to get key sacks at key moments. I think what you see now with Eagle fans, as we rode through a Super Bowl victory, we understand not only the statistical parts of the game, but when the confidence level, when key shifts in momentum are vitally important, when field position is important. This punter for the Eagles is the best in the NFL, I think, in terms of his average, but his net is not that good because he's not positioning the punts. He's got to start learning to do that. And the only reason I say this is because the Eagles' offensive line, for some odd reason, is not playing well. Carson Wentz is getting smacked around pretty bad again. He played a great game against Tennessee, but he got smacked around a lot. And this defense is going to have to compensate for an offense that's weaker. I went into this offseason thinking the Eagles were a weaker team than they were last year. I think they're weaker at tight end until Dallas Goedert steps up and can become a consistent threat. They're weaker. Brett Selleck was a better blocking tight end than Dallas Goedert is. Dallas Goedert's a rookie. I can't expect him to come in and fill the shoes of one of the greatest tight ends in Eagles history right away. The running backs are a disaster right now in terms of picking up blitzes and injuries. Wendell Smallwood, I think, has looked good carrying the ball. He's looked real good carrying the ball. He runs like the Jay Ajayi and Corey Clement, where he fights and fights and fights for those extra yards. And I credit Deuce Staley for building that mentality into the running backs. But Wendell Smallwood is a fifth-round draft pick who can't block when the blitzes come in, and that's hurting the offense. That's rushing Carson Wentz. The loss of Mike Wallace is huge. It's huge not in the fact that Mike Wallace was, going to become an all-pro this year, but he was that speedy wide receiver that you had to count for last year that opened up the field for Nelson Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey. Nelson Aguilar had one of his worst games that you've seen in a long time, and it's going to happen. But is that due to the fact that there is not that speedy threat on the outside that opened up the field for Nelson Aguilar? When I watched the game against Tennessee, Aguilar was catching passes where he was a little bit more tightly covered than he was used to last year. He made some tough catches last year, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of times where he was wide open because of the outside threats. Losing Mike Wallace hurts and brings this offense down to almost to what it was Carson Wentz's rookie year when they had no deep threats. I think the signing of Jordan Matthews was great because he knows the offense and with his relationship with Carson Wentz, but he's not the speedy outside guy. He's a poor man's version of Alshon Jeffrey, really, in terms of that he doesn't have great hands. He can still make good catches. He'll still break one open here and there. He'll still be somewhat reliable, but he's not like Alshon. You don't have to account for him every single time he's out there, which the opposing teams did. And it was awful going into the last week with Alshon Jeffrey coming back. People were actually comparing Jordan Matthews and Alshon Jeffrey and their statistics. And this is where fantasy football gets skewed. Sure, their statistics were similar, and I think Jordan Matthews had the most catches in NFL history in those first 3 seasons, but he wasn't turning the world on fire, and he wasn't someone that had to be counted on every single game. He would drop key touchdown passes. I have yet to really see, outside of the first couple of games last year when Alshon was getting used to Carson Wentz being in a new city as well as a torn rotator cuff, Alshon would always make key catches. You know, every catch he made seemed to be key, whether it's a touchdown or for a first down. He was just the guy, and he proved it last week against Tennessee, going over 100 yards in his first game. But it wasn't enough. The Eagles clearly should have won that game. I thought their secondary is playing with overconfidence. I think the whole defense is playing with overconfidence on the road, and they need to snap out of that. They need to start making key plays, and that's what makes championship teams different than great teams. The difference isn't the physical talent. It's not always the schemes, because I think the coaches put the players in the right schemes, right? I think they really do. But the players have to come through. You know, the players have to make the plays. They have to execute. And right now, the Eagles defense, while executing at a high level at home, looks awful on the road, but looks very susceptible. I think they look susceptible against their secondary. It looks awful. It looks like the secondary from 2016 when it was Jalen Mills' rookie year. You know, you had McLeod coming over and Malcolm Jenkins getting used to each other, and I forget who the other cornerback was on the outside. Ronald Darby in a free agent contract year had a great first game, looked awful, and I think he rode that confidence, looked awful against Tampa Bay on the missed tackles. He's missing tackles left and right. He's tackling too high. He's not pushing the receivers out of bounds. He's not one that I can consistently say he understands where he is in the game, what the game situation is. And what I mean is that being able to make a keys tackle so the first down doesn't happen on third down. Pushing the guy out of bounds instead of going for the fumble and then sliding off of the receiver. I don't think he fully recognizes that. You know, people are talking about let's bench Jalen Mills and put Sidney Jones in there. Sidney Jones is a better outside cornerback than he is in the slot. The loss of Patrick Robinson's hurting. Rasul Douglas is a little too slow to be playing the slot, so he's your backup outside cornerback. But he's a guy that can tackle, and he's a guy that does come up with interceptions. You know, I have to watch more about Jalen Mills. I know he's getting roasted by the media, by the papers, and by receivers. But I think the one thing with Mills is that he can make tackles. I just don't like cornerbacks that can't tackle or understand the situation. I think Mills is getting beat due to lack of focus, but not because of lack of fundamentals. I think Darby's losing things because of fundamentals. His tackling is poor. He's got to make some better tackles. I think Sidney Jones is just getting his feet wet. If he's better on the outside and he's your long-term answer on the outside, then then maybe look to move Mills or Darby, bench one of them, and put Jones in there to start to see what happens. Yeah, now their whole backup safety position, they have no one to back up Corey Graham. I know there's a guy they got from Chicago off of waivers at the end. The guy was cut on the last day, and that often happens. But you don't want to see these guys have to be, his last name is Hall, come in and be key starters right away. He's got to get used to the defense, and he may not have the talent. Right now, what coaches prefer in season is finding players who know the system. That's why I think the Eagles signed Jordan Matthews over others. I think that was one of the factors. His familiarity with the offense, they don't have to come in and teach him too much. I think finding the safety they got from Chicago, they're trying to teach him the various nuances of Jim Schwartz's defense, and hopefully he can come in and make a difference, or at least be reliable. I don't mind Corey Graham. You know, it looks like he's going to be the starter, or he's seeing significant playing time. That's what you want. But if they could pull this other guy Hall in and take the snaps 50-50, or take a lot of the pressure off of Corey Graham, that will be ideal, because there is no starting safety out there that they could have traded for. Unfortunately, Earl Thomas broke his leg and then flipped off his teammates as he was leaving, or flipped off the sideline, whoever he was flipping off, which is one of the bizarre moments in sports. He's gone. He's not a chance to trade for. It doesn't look like the Eagles were serious players for him anyway. To me, I just don't have faith going in against. I don't know how going into the Tennessee game, and the score was 17-3. That's the other thing I haven't talked about. They were up 14 points on the road, 17-3. and they lose that game in overtime. They settle for a field goal. Some people are blaming Doug Peterson. I don't look at that. I think you take the points on the road. That's the standard NFL thing. You have a chance to take the points. You take the points, and you have faith in your defense can step up and not let Marcus Mariota march down the field, convert fourth downs, and throw the game-winning touchdown with like 8 seconds to go. You just don't. I don't blame Doug Peterson for thinking that way. Your defense has this 4th and 19. How do you not stop? 4th and 17, whatever. 4th and whatever. How do you not stop them? How is Corey Graham out of place? It's mental strength. It's mental mistakes. And it's also a chance where you see in all this world of analytics that's starting to come in the NFL, and we'll go into analytics with the Phillies in a little bit, there's no way analytics can make up for human behavior. There's no way. I'm not saying get rid of analytics. I think it's very helpful. I think it's extremely helpful. And you see the Oakland A's have success using analytics almost all of the time. But it's just human error. I've always said free throws. You go to the free throw line. It's a free throw in basketball. If you have the right form, if you have everything perfected, you worked on it, whatever, I can teach free throws and have the right form and the right idea. But you're not going to make you 100% accurate. It's not. There's always going to be that key moment in a game. Maybe the game's on the line and you freeze up and something's wrong with the technique. It's the same thing. Corey Graham had a mental error on his coverage, but you cannot have that. You cannot have that on the road when you're going to win the game if you make the play. And that's what I'm talking about. It's mental strength, it's confidence, and Marcus Mariota had a hell of a game against the Eagles. A guy with a strained shoulder lost one of his starting wide receivers, and he threw for 344 yards and looked in total control the entire game. Even when the Eagles were getting to him, put pressure on him, it didn't seem to bother Mariota. He would take some sacks, which you don't want. It's going to happen. Every quarterback gets sacked a couple times a game now in the NFL. But the fact of the matter is he stepped up when he had to. And Carson Wentz took a beating, and Carson, to me, he stepped up. And the offensive line for the Eagles needs to step up. But to me, it's the defense. It's all about the defense, and it's the key to the Eagles season the rest of the way. The offense can put up points. I don't see them doing it this year. As I said, the lack of outside wide receiver, speedy wide receiver, I should say, whether it's Deshaun Jackson or Mike Wallace. Yeah, there's a huge drop-off in talent and production there, but he's still a speedy wide receiver in that offense, and they need that. The running back situation, Jay Ajayi has a broken bone in his back. I can't imagine what that's like, someone that's had 2 back surgeries, not for broken bones, but all the pain in the back is one of the worst. All of a sudden, Corey Clements got quadricep injuries. Darren Sproles, his hamstring, which I'm sure is related to his knee injury and his age and the miles and miles he's played. Jason Peters didn't look great last week. He's going to have those games, especially him bouncing back, but he has a quad injury. I think Doug Peterson, the head coach, said the other day that Peterson's injury is going to be season long. That means I don't know what quad it is because they don't tell you what leg, or I didn't read too much in depth of it. It does. I'm sure it's a result of either open compensation on his healthy knee, or his damaged knee that was damaged, I think, worse than Carson Wentz's, although earlier in the season last year. That's playing a factor into it. These injuries, it's not because Jason Peters is old or out of shape. I'm sure it's directly, he's not out of shape. He looks great when he's healthy. He looked great in that first game. Looked great, I think, in the second game. But the odds are that it's the knee. It's a 36-year-old knee that's affected, that got destroyed last year, and it's affecting the rest of his muscles as they either compensate for that or lack of strength in that knee. Now, the Eagles have to figure this out quick. They enter into the toughest part of the schedule. They got a very hungry Minnesota team. The Eagles lose this game. They're 2-3. The Giants playing this week. Let's see. Yeah, they play at Carolina. Carolina's favored by 7. Carolina wins that game, but Eagles go 2-3. Giants are 1-4. Going into Thursday night's game, a fast week, a turnaround. Giants have a game to be able to tie the Super Bowl champion Eagles at the same record. Eagles are 2-3. Giants are 1-4. Giants win the game. Both teams are 2-4, and the Giants have the edge in the division. It's a very, very tough stretch. I'm not confident anymore. I need to see this Eagles defense dominate Minnesota And when I say dominate, get key sacks, get key turnovers, make key tackles to win the mental battle. They got to take Minnesota's offense out of their game, and they got to get inside the head, and they got to push it. They got to go for this game. I think this Eagles secondary is waiting for the game to come to them. I think they're saying, you know what, we're going to make the key stop when we have to. And they didn't last week. They didn't make the key stop last week. You know, the fourth downs. How many fourth downs they give up? 3-4 conversions on a 4th and 15 in overtime against a team that's clearly should not have any, not even be in overtime with the Super Bowl champions. Not because Tennessee isn't talented enough. They don't have the same talent. But their receiving core was decimated. But their key players, Deion Lewis, Marcus Mariota, Davis, whoever else, just stepped up at key moments and made the play. Like I said, in the NFL and in professional sports, the talent difference isn't as big as you see at the university or the college levels. It's just not. You know, when Georgetown football team plays Oregon, the talent level is clearly noticeable. But in the NFL, it's not. In the NBA, in the NHL, it's not. The difference between the Buffalo Bills and look at the Minnesota Vikings, a lot of teams that thought that could win the Super Bowl this year. You know, Buffalo goes in after getting humiliated its first couple games, goes in and beat and destroys Minnesota. I mean, it just goes to show you that anyone can win at any given time. The Eagles defense needs to start stepping up, and they're going to have to carry this team because I think the offense is going to struggle. The offense is going to struggle as long as they have no speedy outside wide receiver threat. And it's going to struggle until Dallas Goedert becomes a reliable tight end, catching tight end, blocking tight end out of the backfield. It really is. And they're going to have to until they get their running backs healthy. The defense is going to have to carry this team. And Minnesota is very dangerous on offense. Stephon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph, Adam Thielen, Kirk Cousins, who has a lot of familiarity with the Eagles and a lot of familiarity playing with the Link. And their season is sort of on the line as well. I think the line, and we go through the lines in a bit. We'll go through the NFL before I talk about the Phillies. The line of the Eagles are favored by 3. Cause their home. I'm taking Minnesota with the points. You know, maybe the Eagles can squeak out a 22-20 win. You know, I don't see the Eagles being able to score more than 24 points. So they're going to have to hold this Minnesota offense, which scored 31 against a very, very good Rams defense. Has been scoring points, scored 29 against Green Bay on the road. They can score points. I don't see the Eagles offense the way it looks now with the injuries, the inconsistency of the offensive line, benching one of their starting guards, being able to score more than 24 points on it's not as good Viking defense, but they're still a very, very respectable defense. Even giving up 26 points to Buffalo at home, they have given up some points, but they played a tough schedule. You know, outside of Buffalo, they've played Green Bay on the road. The Rams look like the class of the NFL right now. They played a San Francisco team that didn't really score that many points, even though they were, San Francisco did play pretty well in that game. What I'm trying to say is basically, Minnesota has played a better talented level of teams than the Eagles. Atlanta right now is struggling. They lose a tough game at home against Cincinnati. That's a tough game. Tampa Bay is coming back down to earth a little bit. Ryan Fitzmagic looks like it's gone. They played the Indianapolis Colts, whose defense looks horrible like I thought they did, but the Eagles could only put 20 points against them. And I think the Colts penalties lost the game for them, not Andrew Luck at the end. And then they've played Tennessee, who, I think is 3-1, is a ugly team and a very unpredictable team, but looks like a better team than I thought they were. However, I don't think they match the talent that the Minnesota Vikings have faced this year. And when the Vikings had to step up and play a bad team, they played down to them. So that's what I have to say. I just don't have faith. I think, and also I forgot to, what it reminded me? This game against the Tennessee Titans reminded me of a game. Yes, I'll show my age. 12 years ago, September 17, 2006, and I had to look it up, but it was a game that sat in my craw the entire time as an Eagles fan for all these years. The second worst, more important loss was the Eagles' collapse against the Arizona Cardinals in the NFC Championship game. When the Eagles got down huge, the defense let them down. Donovan gets them all the way back. But then in the key moments, both Brian Dawkins, the Eagles defense, and Donovan McNabb could not step up when they could have beaten the Arizona Cardinals, which effectively ended the tenure of Donovan McNabb and Brian Dawkins. that loss was hard to swallow, but the only reason it was not as hard to swallow was because Kurt Warner was on fire that day. They figured out the Eagles defense and was on fire. And again, like in the Tampa Bay game, they just started going for uppercuts and hitting, and it was definitely difficult for the Eagles defense to battle back. There's a game against the Giants. Eagles are up 24-7 against the New York Giants sometime in the third quarter. And Donovan McNabb comes to the line of scrimmage. And Donovan McNabb, overconfident at the time, he drops his shoulders, sort of what they say, shimmy. He shimmies his shoulders. He shimmies so much that the ref calls false start on him because maybe the Giants flinched or it was so pronounced, drops the Eagles back. I'm not sure if it was the next play but I know it was in the series. There was a handoff to Brian Westbrook, and Westbrook fumbles, and the Giants recover the fumble. They go down and score points. In that game, the Eagles suffered a injury to their cornerback. I believe it was Toledo Shepard or Sheldon Brown. It was one of those two. I think it was Toledo Shepard. Went out with a hamstring injury, I think returning a punt or something, or didn't play. And the Eagles had to put in a guy named Joselio Hansen, who at the time had never started a game or played significant moments in a game. And Joselio Hansen had to cover, at the time, all pro tight end or Plexico Barris. And Eli Manning went and picked on Joselio Hansen. Yeah, I think he came in for Lito Shepard because I think Shepard pulled his hamstring on a punt return. And they just kept going after Joselio Hansen. It seemed like every other player, anytime the Giants needed a first down, Plexico Barris. And the Giants get the game to overtime. In overtime, the Eagles, Javon Curse, who was the second high-profile free agent the Eagles signed the year the Eagles got Terrell Owens. They also signed Javon Curse to a monster contract. He shreds his knee in overtime. The Giants clearly took control of that game, won that game in an early season battle where the Eagles mentally collapsed. They got too confident on offense. When Donovan McNabb does that shimmy with the shoulder, and then Brian Westbrook fumbles, who was not known as a fumbler. He never would have had the career as the second best running back in Eagles history, and retired at the time as the best. And then the defense, but then Eli Manning just went and picked on Joselio and did what he was supposed to do. And the whole defense, the entire team collapsed that day because, in my mind, of that shimmy. That was such an overconfident, unnecessary, just gut-wrenching loss. Unnecessary, gut-wrenching, nervous the whole time, all because of Don McNabb and his overconfidence and arrogance. No respect for the Giants team. The New York Giants. Divisional opponent. You have to win those games. And I looked at the mental collapse of the Eagles on Sunday. The defense, not the offense so much, because the offense is just, I think, like I said, is going to struggle all year long, even with Carson Wentz rounding into form. They're better than the 2016 version, but they're going to struggle for the lack of outside wide receiver, and until Dallas Goedert becomes a reliable option in the offense. And the running backs get healthy. Anyway, my point being is that you don't give up fourth downs like that. You know, you get the fumble, you recover the fumble. You don't let the team convert fourth downs. A 4th and 17. I don't care how bad the team is. You make sure you're in the right position. And that loss hurt just as bad as that New York Giants loss. Sure, they're early season losses. And the Tennessee loss, look, it may not come back to bite the Eagles because it's also a conference. It's an out-of-conference loss, which you want to win your division and you want to win in the conference. And if you're going to lose games, you lose them out of the conference, right? So if they would have been 1-3, which would have been awful, losing to Indianapolis and Tennessee, and they had every right to lose to Indianapolis this week. I mean, like they said, they're a couple of plays of being 0-4, 1-3, or 4-0, or 3-1. I mean, I just think the Tampa Bay game was the game where they're just outplayed clearly. You just can't have these mental breakdowns. They got to get tougher. They got to step up, and the defense is going to have to carry the team. And right now, going into this Minnesota game against a more desperate team, a team also with revenge on its mind, Kirk Cousins, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, Kyle Rudolph, and whatever they can get out of the running game, I just don't see it happening. I think they'll get to Kirk Cousins. I think they'll rattle him. I think they'll step up, and I think it's going to be an emotional start for the Eagles, and the Eagles might jump out to a 14-0 lead, but I think Cousins has the experience, both playing the Eagles and playing in the Link, that I think it's going to be tough for the Eagles to win, and I don't see the Eagles offense scoring more than 24 points if they can get to that. Looking around the league, Indianapolis and New England. New England looks like it's rounding back into form. They won. They were favored by 10. They won by 14. I picked Indy because I thought Andrew Luck had a great game against was it the Rams the week before, or Frank Reich went for it? Let me see. I'll look at against Houston. Yeah, Houston wins 37-34. But Indy hung in there with them against a good team. I thought they could hang in with New England. They didn't. New England wins. Baltimore, Cleveland. Baltimore, to me, looks like it's the class of the AFC North, if you could say. Or you have Cincinnati as well. That's going to be the two teams. Cleveland coming off a gut-wrenching loss against Oakland on the road and really battled back. But I think this Baltimore team, coming off the confidence and rest of beating Pittsburgh pretty handily in Pittsburgh, 26-14, I think they'll win and cover against Cleveland. Jacksonville goes into Kansas City. Kansas City's favored by 3. I'm picking Jacksonville here with the points, not necessarily for the win, because Patrick Mahomes, who looks phenomenal so far, setting NFL records, kind of came down to earth a little bit against the Denver Broncos. And the Jacksonville defense, to me, in my mind, is the best defense in football. I think they'll cover and maybe even win in Kansas City. And Jacksonville, after beating Pittsburgh on the road in the playoffs last year and should have beat New England on the road in the playoffs, knows how to play against favorite teams and when they're on the road, and they don't play with fear. Tennessee at Buffalo. Tennessee minus 3.5. I think Buffalo, who got shut out last week, I take Tennessee here. I mean, I'm just taking it based because I think the Eagles made a quarterback with a strained elbow look like an all-pro last week. Buffalo, yeah, they had that huge win against Minnesota, but then laid an egg against Green Bay, and their offense couldn't score at all. I think Tennessee's defense is better than Green Bay's overall. I will take Tennessee 3.5. Giants go into Carolina. Carolina coming off a bye. The Giants, yeah, I thought they could be the main competitors for the Eagles. They got beat by the Saints, which is nothing to lower your head about, but they just don't look good at all, especially defensively. Like I said, Carolina coming off a bye, and it looks like Cam Newton's understanding the offense a little bit better. I think they win easily on the road. Denver goes into the Jets. The Jets, after their looked like a fantastic opening, have really stumbled against Detroit, have really stumbled coming in. I think Denver's not as bad as they are, as the record seems to be. They go into a 1-point underdog. I'll take Denver on the road and for the win against the Jets. I think they understand. They have some stability at quarterback now. They also got rid of Aqib Talib, who probably was not the best person to have in the locker room. Even with his all-pro play on the field. The defense looks like it's playing a little bit better than it did last year. Atlanta and the Pittsburgh, two struggling teams that look like they're trying to search for the identity of who they are. It's in Pittsburgh. Again, you're coming off it's Pittsburgh team that got that last week. The game wasn't against Baltimore. They lost 26-14. That was a Sunday night game. Sorry, I thought it was the last week's Thursday night game. I think Pittsburgh's looking for revenge. Atlanta, coming off a horrible loss at home against Cincinnati, goes into. I think it's one of these where you have two struggling teams for identity. Take the home team with the points. Green Bay goes into Detroit. Detroit, another team searching for their identity under Matt Patriarca after they beat New England last week. They struggled on the road against Dallas, losing that game. Not sure they should not have lost to the Cowboys after beating the Patriots. Green Bay has a chance to, with the Eagles-Minnesota game, has a chance to put a little bit of distance between themselves in the division. Look for Green Bay to cover and win against Detroit. Miami goes into Cincinnati. Cincinnati, 6.5-point favorite. Cincinnati coming off a great win on the road against Atlanta. Yes, it's out of conference. It doesn't matter that much. But anytime you go into Atlanta, the perennial NFC favorites or one of the NFC favorites, and win the way they did, has to give you confidence. But with the points, 6.5, I think Miami's going to cover the points. They got throttled by New England, but they only dropped to 3-1. And I think they need to regain a sense to reclaim their season a little bit. It's a key matchup in terms of for wild card, or for Miami, it could be a divisional thing, but in terms of seeding in the AFC, this is a huge game for both teams. I think Cincinnati probably will win the game, but I don't think they will cover. Chargers in Oakland. It's in LA. The Chargers are favored by 5 points over Oakland. I'll take Oakland to cover. I think Oakland's starting to understand the way John Gruden plays. They lost a tough game against Denver in Denver, 20-19, 2 weeks ago. Then they beat a Cleveland team that's clearly is starting to play with confidence, but they won in a shootout. And to me, again, going back to the whole confidence thing, mental strength, I think these two games, the last two games, the Denver game, where Oakland, like I said, lost, but I think they gained a lot of confidence. And being able to win in a shootout against, I don't care how bad Cleveland is, at home, it's a team on the upstart. I think they're starting to get their identity. I think they cover this game. They might even win against the Chargers, who I don't know what to say about the Chargers. I want to root for them every year. I like Phillip Rivers. I like the way he plays football. But they just can't seem to come up with key wins. They struggled against the San Francisco team they should have blew out last week. They're home against them. They're playing against C.J. Beathard, and they barely beat them. I just don't have faith in them, much like the Eagles right now on defense. Arizona goes into San Francisco. Arizona starting Josh Rosen for the second week, and just a guy, the Sam Bradford, who I want to root for. Looks like he benched himself. Starts the rookie that was inevitable anyway. San Fran has to come off with confidence with C.J. Beathard. Arizona's defense is not as good as it used to be. Look for San Francisco to cover at home. Eagles in Minnesota. Minnesota getting 3 points. I take them. Rams go into Seattle, which is always a dangerous place to play, but the Rams are playing with the utmost confidence. And it's, in Seattle, barely beating a bad Arizona team. And the whole Earl Thomas debacle could do one of two things. One, it could really demoralize Seattle, both on the field and mentally, or it could unite them, knowing that Earl Thomas is no longer back there. The distraction is gone, probably gone forever. However, I think the Rams are just it's a key divisional game, and they're the class of the NFL right now. I think they cover. Dallas goes into Houston. Houston's another team I can't really get a shake on. Dallas won a tough game against Detroit last week. I think they'll cover, even though they're on the road. I'm picking the Cowboys. And I'm doing it for one. The other reason is that I think this Cowboys team is better than I thought it was going to be. I'm surprised that they beat Detroit. I'm not surprised they lost to Carolina and Seattle. And I was a little surprised they won the opening game. I think they played Carolina week one. They lost to Carolina week one, but they beat the Giants in Dallas pretty handily. And I thought that was, for me, who was going to be the better team this season. And I think Dallas has a chance to be 3-2. They have a chance to be 3-2 going into keep the second place in the division. Right now, the Eagles are in third place at 2-2. Dallas, by virtue of divisional wins, is 2-2, and Washington, just because they haven't played, is 2-1. I'm picking Dallas. If Dallas loses this game, not necessarily not cover, but if Dallas loses this game, I still don't know what I have going into week 5, but this is week 5. Not sure. Anyway, pick Dallas. Washington goes into New Orleans. New Orleans coming off a nice win against the Giants on the road, where the Giants are not a good team, but I think New Orleans is starting. It looked like they're starting to put things together. After they started off, they struggled against getting beat by Tampa Bay, struggling against Cleveland. It looks like the Saints are starting to get their feet under them and become one of the contenders, I think, for the NFC crown. And then, of course, they get back their other running back, Mark Ingram, this week. Washington, coming off a bye on the road. It's not a very good road team. I don't think this Washington team is good as its 2-1 record. I think they're kind of mediocre. I look for the Saints to win and to cover. And that heads into week 5. If you're wondering how my picks were with the spreads, after 25%, I started off red hot with a 11-4-1 week 1, but then came down to earth quickly, going 4-11 the next week. I'm at 28-30-3, so I've won 28 of the games that I've picked in the spread. With the spread, I've lost 30, and I've tied 3, which, if you're not familiar, it means basically that the way you tie is that the team you picked either won or lost the game by the line. For example, go back to the Eagles game. The Eagles are favored by 3, right? So I'm picking Minnesota. So if the Eagles win by 3, say they win 23-20, that would be a tie because I picked Minnesota. Minnesota lost by 3, but they're getting 3 points, so they broke even in that game. So that's the way that works. It's a lot better than I was doing at this time last year. In the fantasy league, I'm also 2-2 like the Eagles. Made a stupid mistake by picking up the Indianapolis tight end and not starting him this week, which I think was a computer error. But we also do straight up pick'ems. That means pick who you think is going to win the game, not including the spread. And I'm tied for first place with 37 wins after the entire season. So that's a look at the NFL week. I went 50 minutes there. I'm going to take a small break, and we'll talk about some other Philadelphia sports when I come back. Welcome back to the Kwasiborski Show. Again, calling live and direct here in Prague, the Czech Republic. We're experiencing what they call Indian summer here. It's going to go up to about 71, 72. There's not a cloud in the sky, and I'm going to get my butt out of the apartment after I finish this podcast with a few events on the docket for tonight. We talked a lot about the Eagles and focused on the defense's inability to come up with key stops or key turnovers, mental strength, confidence. Which turns me to the end of the baseball season and the Philadelphia Phillies, who had pretty much I would say the most talked about season is about the way, the more emotional season as you can elicit from the Philadelphia Phillies dating back to 2011. So in 7 years. The reason why they were a first place team, 15 games over 500 as on August the 5th. They had swept the Marlins, the downtrodden Miami Marlins, at their home stadium, Citizens Bank Park, and the Phillies had the best home record, I believe, in the National League. Then they went into a horrendous tailspin the last 2 months of the season. And in fact, the last month of the season, September, they went 8-20. I believe they finished with the worst. They had clearly the worst record, I think, in all of baseball since the 5th of August. And no team that was 15 games over the 500 mark as late as August the 5th failed to make the playoffs or failed to finish with a winning record. The Phillies finished with an 80-82 record this year. The positives are that they're 14 games better than last year. But it's almost like a false positive. They finished last year 66-96. I'm talking about season 2017. They finished that with a lame duck manager and Pete Mackanin. Everyone knew they were going to make the change. And Pete Mackanin, who is like, the Jim Riggleman. He's almost like Jim Riggleman. He's a guy that's always the interim, never the head man. And when he becomes the head man, he's clearly just a transitional head man. But the thing about the 66-96 record last year fails to reflect for the fact that after the All-Star break, which is traditionally the midpoint season of Major League Baseball, the Phillies actually finished above 500. I think finished 37-34. So they clearly played hard for their manager, who was obviously a lame duck. A lot of those players on the team last year knew that they weren't going to be on the team next year and were playing for jobs for the season 2018. This year's Phillies team started out basically with a lot of excitement and some trepidation about the manager, Gabe Kapler, a guy who's a very, very unique individual. When you look at his physique, he's the same age as I am and looks like he's has been a model. He's basically he has no body fat. Talks about the values of coconut oil and the fact that he likes ice cream. He tastes ice cream, but spits it out due to the calorie factor and everything it does to your body. Relies heavily on analytics, and says, look, they're going to play positional baseball. They're going to say whatever the matchups are going to be, he's going to play those matchups no matter what. No matter what the human production is being at this point. We talked about this earlier with human production. You can have the best free throw form, but it doesn't mean you're going to be 100% or even 90%. And there's going to be key moments where your body, freezes up due to the moment, or it's a little bit injured. And I'm basically saying that computers and analytics cannot account for human behavior. It doesn't mean abandon analytics, but this season was an experiment on this whole analytics thing. It's basically coming down as you're playing baseball as a video game. You're taking in all the stats, you're looking at all the matchups, and you're trying to put your team in the best position to win, and that's what it is. And that's what anything is in the world. You just put your team, your organization, your company, your whatever in the best position to win, and it's up to the players to execute in those situations. What was clearly evident through 75% of the season, I'm guessing from till August 5th, is that this strategy was working. The Phillies were 15 games over 500. They clearly were. Gabe Kapler was not the front runner for manager of the year, only because the team ahead of them, the Atlanta Braves, where I thought they were clearly their manager, probably won manager of the year, because they were supposed to be in the same boat as the Phillies, in rebuilding years and not contending. And Atlanta Braves win the division and make the playoffs, very surprisingly. So I think their manager wins the manager of the year award. But going back to that, was that this analytical approach was working. It was working. He also had some benchings this year. He benched Maikel Franco for a period of play. When Maikel came back, he became a productive member, and I think the only reliable member of the offense, even playing through a sore wrist and things like that. That kind of approach worked with him when he was also being criticized in public. It just worked. But their reliability on analytics and their approach to the game, the way the analytics, I think, stress doubles and home runs instead of just getting on base, because teams are shifting now. They're looking at to where the strength of the player hits singles, maybe doubles without power. Obviously, everywhere he hits besides for home runs are clearly long fly balls. Defenses now play to that position. I take Cesar Hernandez, who was the Phillies' best hitter the last couple of years, who was a singles doubles kind of hitter, a guy who could stretch the bases, was never a power hitter, with occasional home, he would hit under 20 home runs, but was a leadoff hitter and would always be in the 290, 280 range, or sometimes batting 300. Looked awful this year. Struck out more times than ever, walked more times than ever, but struck out more times than ever. Looked like he was playing with a bit of an injury, but it clearly looked like the Phillies were asking him to hit the ball long distances, either for home runs or doubles. When that happens, you're going to strike out a ton. And I think that was a wrong approach there. But what concerned me most, and I wasn't able to watch every game here in Prague, being typically every game would start around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and go on for 4 hours. I just don't have that kind of ability to stay up. The team collapsed in September, and they collapsed bad. Once they were out of it, it looked like this team could care less. Getting beat in Colorado, giving up 10-plus runs a game to Atlanta, to Colorado, to just falling completely apart, to almost to where the team tuned out the manager and his strategies. Philadelphia fans, any sports fans, but Philadelphia fans will take a loss as long as we show maximum effort every single time, every single inning, every single at bat. You show maximum effort and we lose, we'll accept that more. But we cannot accept, and no fan of any team should ever accept, teams getting blown out the way the Phillies did and just completely laid over. It seemed to me they started tuning out the manager, tuning out this idea of analytics. I read a great article today in the Athletic, written by Megan Monahan, who's the Phillies cover for the Athletic, a Phillies beat writer. And she quotes a reliever who said, "Look, Gabe Kapler is managing every game like it's the 7th game of the World Series." He's like, yeah, the idea is that, of course, you put your best players in position to win, but it's not the 7th game of the World Series. Not every game is do or die. And it made the relievers uneasy because they don't understand where their position was within the bullpen. The closer in baseball, like a kicker in American football, like a goalie in ice hockey, when they get hot, man, they're just all world all the time, looking like Hall of Fame players. But when they're cold, they look awful. And not everyone can be a closer. Not every dominant reliever can be a closer. Not every dominant starting goaltender can carry a team in 7 games. Not every NFL kicker, no matter how successful their regular season is, they miss key kicks in the playoffs. Their career could be over because they go into the next season not playing well. Again, it goes to the fact that there's not a huge difference between the talent levels of players at the Major League Baseball level, NFL, NBA, what have you. It's their mental ability to perform in the clutch. And the Phillies had huge issues at the closer position. And relievers are sort of, they have to get into routines. They have to, they're the type of, because they're, besides position players who also rely on routine, they want to know, where they stand, when they're going to be used, and how they're going to be used. And it's a mental makeup. It really is. The seventh inning guy, he's used to being the seventh inning guy. But when you start moving him to the fifth or the fourth, which Gabe Kapler was doing, was pulling his starters early, most of the time because of a bad offense, but was also looking at the matchups and getting pinch hitters, moving them around third inning, fourth inning, seventh inning, eighth inning, sometimes ninth inning. Not all relievers have the makeup to do that. The Phillies had a great reliever in Hector Neris, who has all the talent in the world, but he can't close. He can't close. He's one of the better. When the Phillies sent him down to the minors, they brought him back up to be the sixth, seventh inning guy. He was dominant. He was lights out. Move him to the eighth or ninth, he can't do it. He did have a few saves down the line because, I think his renewed confidence was working, but the Phillies clearly weren't comfortable putting him as a closing road every night. Sir Anthony Dominguez throws over 100 as a wicked slider. He can't close. Not yet, anyway. He could not close. He could not pitch back-to-back nights. The few games that I watched when I was home, whether it was June or this September, he looks like he's nibbling when in pressure situations instead of overpowering guys like he was doing when he was coming in the seventh, eighth innings. Again, it goes back to the analytics. It goes back to where sometimes I think the analytics have to take a secondary position to human behavior. And I'm not saying I don't favor analytics. I think they're great. I think, and sometimes, you put a shift on against a guy who clearly pulls the ball all the time. Or you put a shift on when he plays against this, when a batter bats against a right-handed batter, bats against a certain left-handed pitcher, but seems to pull the ball or hits it to the other side, then put the shift on. I don't have a problem with that. I don't really have a problem with shifts. They're talking about Major League Baseball should limit the number of shifts. I don't have a problem with that. What that's doing, though, is to offenses is making them swing for home runs and doubles, but offenses will eventually adjust to that. And that's up to the hitter to adjust as well. The hitter's got to also start changing their style. But when it comes to managing, I think, a pitching staff, I think there has to be more consistency. What I really admired about Gabe Kapler was that he got the most out of this team up until the 5th of August. But after that, you got to find out how to win the key games. And when it gets closer to the end of seasons, when games start meaning more, analytics does have to take a backseat to just human behavior. It really does. You have to really start looking at the way certain lineups work, certain players in certain positions in lineups are working, what relievers are working when, at that point of the season or at that point of time, not necessarily go back to the way you manage. You cannot manage, or anytime games are on the line, you have to change your coaching strategy. Doug Peterson gets a lot of credit last year leading the Eagles to Super Bowls. He was aggressive. He was aggressive all season, but he was still aggressive in the playoffs. I always said that Andy Reid and Bobby Cox, who's Andy Reid, the old Philadelphia Eagles coach, who I love the guy to death and wish him all the best in Kansas City, or Bobby Cox, the Atlanta Braves manager, who had a string of winning 14 consecutive World Series, but with one World Series, 14 consecutive pennants or divisions getting into the World Series, only winning one. Andy Reid could only win one World Series, and you see the way they lost to Tennessee last year in the playoffs, where Marcus Mariota put Tennessee on his back, and they win that playoff game on the road in Kansas City. Those managers or coaches, whatever you want to call them, never had their team step up when the game was on the line. I thought they approached it. They said they don't want to break the routine. They don't want to stop relying upon what got them there in the first place, i.e. analytics had gotten the Phillies as far as August the 5th. Andy Reid would get to the playoffs, 12-4, 13-3 records, 11-5, won the division many, many years in a row. It's what got him here. Bobby Cox, same thing, won all of these divisional titles, pennants, but couldn't win the big one. I think because the way they coach, the way they manage, they don't manage in the moment. They rely, or when they think they are managing in the moment, maybe they are, but they're still not overcome, but they're still relying back on what got them there. And that is what I think changes the approach in the playoffs, or when the games start meaning the most leading up to the playoffs and into the championships. You have to adjust your managing style, because what happens when games start meaning more The opposition plays faster. They play a little harder. They're more focused mentally. Again, it goes back to that mental factor. They're focused mentally. And managers and coaches that are successful have championship success. Not so much getting to the championship and losing all the time. They have that ability to get their teams to recognize the moment and manage within the moment while still relying on what got them there overall, but not trying to outsmart themselves, yet get their players to step up. I think Nick Foles is the prime example of this. And I know I'm talking about various sports and going back to football here. Nick Foles, backup quarterback, played with awful confidence leading into the playoffs. And in the first half against Atlanta, first quarter played awful. But something changed. Something, the coaches said something to him. The players said something to him that put him on an unbelievable streak of success in the playoffs, especially in the second half of playoff games as a backup quarterback. They beat a very talented Atlanta Falcons defense at home. They shred one of the best defenses the NFL has seen in a long time statistically. And then they go and they out gunsling the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady and his offense. The offense goes and outswings them. There was something that goes to mental preparation and mental strength, and Nick Foles had that. Going into finishing up the season, I looked at the Phillies team that just gave up. They gave up when the teams mattered the most. Look, they had an awful August, but they were still in contention. And there was still in the first week of September where Atlanta was playing a tough streak, but the Phillies were playing a diet of the Mets, the Marlins, and a Nationals team that wasn't as talented as they should have been, obviously, clearly. And the Phillies should have won that, yet they're losing series to the Marlins, to the Mets, to the Nationals. And they're getting swept by the Nationals. And that's when the Atlanta Braves were struggling because they had a diet of like Chicago, Colorado, maybe the Dodgers. The Phillies should have still been able to do that, even with the awful August they had. And then once they were out of it, that team gave up. I'm not saying, change the manager. I think Gabe Kapler is one of the most intelligent people ever to play baseball. Obviously, his career he didn't have the physical skills to make it into a Hall of Fame career. But I think he has the right approach. I think the reliance on analytics is the right way. And it gave them the edge all the way up to August the 5th. And now he needs to learn how to adjust his thinking and adjust his approach. And to be honest, it goes back to the very first game he manages in the regular season against the Atlanta Braves. Aaron Nola is cruising through the Atlanta Braves. Come the sixth inning, Kapler, relying on analytics, takes him out of the game, in which he should have. Not because Aaron Nola was struggling, but Kapler is preaching, this is my style, this is the way I'm going to manage, this is the way we're going to do things throughout the entire season. He can't go back on his word at that point in time. But human behavior at that time goes to show you leave Aaron Nola in maybe to finish the sixth inning. Maybe, get an out in the seventh inning, see how he feels. Then maybe you start relying on your analytics a little bit more and start playing the matchups. And I think teams, especially when it comes to a pitching staff, there has to be more consistency. There is a mental approach to always knowing where you're batting, and every sports team, they always want consistency and they want to know what they rely upon because it's one less thing they have to worry about. I do think it affects pitchers more than hitters. I think when hitters are moved up and down the line, they just have to adjust. I mean, they have to know they're going to face worse pitches or better pitchers at certain pitches at certain points of the time. But for pitchers, they need that consistency. And I think mismanaging or quoting that unnamed reliever saying he was managing every game like the seventh game of the World Series, and it made them nervous to know what their position was going to be. And that's what it is. That team gave up, and I think that's a huge, the Phillies, Gabe Kapler is obviously a positive guy, almost too positive. Even not the owner, but the president of the Phillies criticized Gabe Kapler for being too honest, especially in Philadelphia when we can see it's just all bullshit and smokescreen. But what he has is the offseason to go to his players that are going to return next year and focus on the positives and build that confidence back up heading into spring training. He has that chance to do it. Going into the offseason, there's huge rumors that the Phillies will make a play for either Bryce Harper or Manny Machado or both. The president of baseball operations, Andy McPhail, said, look, we're not one or two players away. McPhail's taking more of a realistic approach and saying that, look, we're not one or two players away. We could be, 3 or 4 players away. And to be quite honest, bolstering the lineup by ignoring the pitching staff might not be the best way. I think the Phillies got, I don't say caught, I think the Phillies just got unlucky, realistically, heading into the trading deadline. Nick Pivetta looked like almost a Cy Young candidate at number 3. They thought Jake Arrieta was going to turn around. So the Phillies went out and bolstered their lineup in defense instead of looking at their starting pitching, and they got burned for it. I don't think that was the wrong way. I think Cabrera came through with a couple of key hits. Wilson Ramos is a much better defensive catcher, but also an offensive catcher back there. I like that pickup. I like the pickup of the first baseman from the Marlins. Good key left-hander coming off the bench, and they picked up a lefty reliever who I don't think had much impact. But they didn't go after Cole Hamels. A lot of people wanted Cole Hamels to come back to the Phillies, but at the time, Cole Hamels looked awful in Texas. Goes to Chicago, has a major run, almost like a Roy Oswald-ish kind of run, just a magical run. Gets the Cubs to the playoffs. They lose, but not because of him. Would the Phillies have done better getting Cole Hamels? Yeah, but would it stop the collapse? I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because that team collapsed, and they collapsed hard, and they collapsed historically bad. And that goes to the mental strength. Like I said, they should have been in every game of every series in August and September, and they clearly were not. And they were getting beat, and they were not doing the best they could. I think the pressure got to them, but I also think it's up to the managers and the coaches. None of them who were really experienced, except for Robbie Thompson, the bench coach from the Yankees. None of them had the experience of playing in pennant baseball or performing at that point, or had very limited experience. And I think that goes to show you need coaches. Often in every sport, mostly every coach is an ex-player at some level. But also at the major league level, you should have coaches that have major league experience playing under pressure situations. They got to pick themselves up. They got to know when to focus a little bit more. Baseball is a more routine than any sport there is because there's so many games that it's hard to get caught up in the, not the nuances, but the monotony of everyday playing. It's the hardest sport, I think, to jack up your game or raise your level of play because there's so many games. And I think that was a huge issue, and it's a huge issue for this team. And I think Kapler should be under the gun. Klintak, the general manager, people are saying he's not doing the right thing. I don't know. I look at Klintak, like I said, I think the moves he made for giving up basically nothing is fine. Not going after a struggling Cole Hamels who could be at the end of his career, it's fine. Signing Carlos Santana, I'm still scratching my head at the strategy of that move. We have his contract for the next 2 years, and I want to give Carlos Santana, who I think brought focus to that clubhouse, was considered to be the veteran leader. Reminded me of the Greg Jeffrey signing of the mid-'90s. Get a proven veteran in here, who's played in some of the playoffs, and then just let him, kind of be a bridge. And I think that's what Santana is a 3-year bridge to when they bring back Rhys Hoskins to first base, and they sign a Bryce Harper or someone else, or maybe might go after Mike Trout, Harper, and then they put Hoskins back at first base. Santana's long gone. I don't know. He deserves another chance. If he's the starting third baseman, that's kind of strange because, I think Maikel Franco was their best and most consistent hitter throughout the year. I think they got to get rid of Herrera, the center fielder. I think Hernandez needs to go just because he's getting older. Put Kingery, a guy they invested a lot of money in, put him back at his natural position at second base. Let J.P. Crawford get some reps at shortstop if they don't sign Manny Machado. Put Machado, keep Franco at third. I'm not a Bryce Harper fan. I think he's immensely talented physically. I think mentally he's got issues in the clubhouse. That Nationals team, and I used to live in Washington, especially when they drafted him in Strasburg, and watching that team come up, they should have won more. They should have won at least a playoff series with that lineup. When you have a rotation of Strasburg, Scherzer, who'll probably win the Cy Young Award again, and when Gio Gonzalez was reliable, there's no reason they should have lost any of those series. They should have at least won one of those series. Bryce Harper, I think there's just something, when you're, even though Jonathan Papelbon was an asshole, the Phillies all-time saves leader, by the way, was an asshole. He's choking Bryce Harper in the dugout. I mean, something's not right with Harper either. Harper obviously wasn't completely innocent in that situation. For as mentally talented as he had an awful year at the plate. He had struggled all year long, especially in the beginning. Pressure of the free agent contract. The pressure is now on him to produce without Jason Worth finally gone from the team. The pressure, and he didn't perform. I'm sorry, that team failed miserably. A lot of people thought the Nationals were going to win the World Series, and at least get to the World Series. That team collapsed, and I think Bryce Harper is one of the reasons, because of his whatever kind of chemistry he eludes or energy he gives off is negative in that clubhouse, and I don't think he's the answer. Would I be disappointed now? As I'll be one of these, well, maybe Bryce Harper, has stability, comes with an up-and-coming team, is looked upon to be, the kind of the role model, and just, hey, sit back and produce. We're not ready to win yet, blah, 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 blah. Maybe I could fall into that, but I don't know. Some guy, he just doesn't seem like a guy who's ready to change or to do that kind of things. Philadelphia Flyers kicked off their season as well with a resounding 5-2 victory over the defending Western Conference champions, the Las Vegas Golden Knights. And the Golden Knights, on the night they raised their Western Conference banner. What a unique story they are, the Golden Knights. And I was listening to Philadelphia Sports Radio yesterday, and one of the stations, 97.5, is going through a lot of turnover, not turnover, but a lot of turmoil, I should say. Turnover usually means you get rid of people and you start new. They kind of are, I guess, turnover, turmoil, whatever. But it's affected clearing I listened to their morning show and their afternoon show mostly. In the afternoon show, they're using two people that are fill-ins, obviously. But one guy was saying how it was awful that the Las Vegas Golden Knights were raising a banner to be the Western Conference champions. And I don't know if he's criticizing the fact that maybe because they raised the banner instead of just because they weren't Stanley Cup champions, that it should have just appeared there in the stadium, or they should have an unveiling of it, kind of like drop the curtain, there it is. I didn't really understand his criticism because maybe they raised it to the rafters. I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Here's an expansion team last year who got to the Stanley Cup Finals or to the championship of the level of their sport. That never happens in sports, ever. Why not raise the banner? Why not raise the banner in terms of building a winning culture? They're also trying to build a culture, not so much in Philadelphia or Boston or New York, Chicago, in Las Vegas. Build a culture of winning. A team that never existed a year ago, or whatever have you, or just barely just started a year ago. You let them, and trying to build some sort of confidence. And usually, what happens with expansion teams, they get proven NHL players from all over the league, and then they try to build through their farm system. And then by the time the farm system's ready, the older players are gone. But that's not the case. The Golden Knights have a very talented team. They don't have the star power. They picked up Stasny this year, which I think is a good pickup for them. Marc-Andre Fleury carries them as far as he could, but surprisingly did well, rebounded from a bad career ending in Pittsburgh. But why not raise the banner? Why not try to build a sense of winning culture? Because what's going to happen? Say this year they don't get as far, or they get just as far, and they lose in the Stanley Cup Finals again, which is a high probability considering they didn't lose much talent and added some talent. Then you say, you know what, we raised the banner last year out of success of our first season, doing something that's very unique, but this year we're just going to unveil it and not raise it in the sense that the only time we'll raise the banner is that when we win the Stanley Cup. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the Vegas Knights trying to establish a sense of culture, establish identity, and build within the fan base. That's exactly what they should be doing, is build that fan base up. Let them see what success is. You never have this kind of success for expansion teams ever. And I think the announcer yesterday, I don't know which was Joe Staszak or Martitas, I think it was Staszak, clearly wasn't taking that into factor. He was just saying it's awful. You should only raise a banner. And what I mean raising, you start out at ground level and you put it up to the rafters. You should only do that when you win the Stanley Cup. And at first I thought he was saying not to acknowledge their Stanley Cup run by just kind of letting the banner appear, just shine lights upon it, but you don't unveil it. I mean, every team that I know within their stadiums in basketball and ice hockey have some sort of banners recognizing this if they had playoff success, if they won the division, if they got to the playoffs, won whatever. But maybe then I started thinking about, maybe he was just talking about the absolute physical effect of raising a banner, and I have no problem with that. No problems. I think he failed to take into account that they're trying to build a culture, that it was historically unique what the Golden Knights did last year. And, why not recognize it by raising the banner? If they continually to raise a banner every year, they get to some sort of playoff milestone without winning Stanley Cup, then I could see the criticism. But, it's not the St. Louis Blues raising a banner. If raising the banner, you only do that for Stanley Cup, there's a team like the St. Louis Blues, Flyers, whatever, an established team, okay, then I understand. But I have no problem with them doing that. I've been talking a lot, so going into an hour and 20 minutes, the Matt Kwasiborski Show, calling you from Prague, Czech Republic, sort of towards the end. Flyers and Sixers. Flyers, as I mentioned, kicked off their season on Thursday night, Friday morning here in Prague with a great victory, 5-2. They always start off hot. This team is still inconsistent. I still think this team is better than last year, but it's still a mediocre team. It's a mediocre playoff, probably get to the playoffs, losing the first round kind of team. I don't see this team that made any significant improvements to its roster outside of signing James Riemsdyk, which was clearly evident and has been clearly a need to sign a big scoring winger. Sure, he provides depth, and it's a chance for him to come back to Philadelphia after a very short-lived career as a second overall draft pick with too many expectations, which is similar for Philadelphia athletes to go under. But what I'm trying to say is that it's a great move. I'm glad the Flyers are, they're on their program where they're slowly building into a contender. I'm glad they didn't get rid of Jake Voracek or Claude Giroux or Wayne Simmons. I think Riemsdyk and a healthy Simmons is going to be a huge addition. But they're still a team that doesn't know how to rise to the occasion, has questionable goaltending when the season is on the line, especially in the playoffs. I do think Hextall, their coach, rides the veteran backup goalies into trying to make them great starters, but come the playoff times, they're exhausted. They have another goalie in Michael Neuwirth of the Czech Republic who's just always hurt. When he's on, but he's just throughout his career, that's why he's a journeyman goaltender. And now we're in year 3 of this guy. Is he really going to be Reliance? There's a young goaltender named Anthony Stolarz who, when he has played at the NHL level, has done very well, but for some reason the coach has no confidence in him. Either doesn't like him, has no confidence, but he keeps relying upon proven NHL goaltenders. Look, when this team is young and up and coming, what their defense is, you got to start relying on the younger guys at some point in the net to see if they can build some chemistry. Their goaltending is Brian Elliott, who until he got hurt last year looked phenomenal, and Michael Neuwirth, as we mentioned, but now he's sort of hurt, so they picked up someone named Picard, another backup goaltender, albeit from Toronto. I just don't see these goaltenders stepping up and making the big hit, being mentally ready to win at the championship level. I think they improve their depth. I think the experience of a Travis Konechny, Nolan Patrick, who will be completely healthy this year, and maybe even Scott Lawton, I think those young guys have a chance to step up to make it a very, very solid offensive team. And defensively, their young guys have to step up. But I just don't see this team right now this season taking that next level. And I don't care how hot they are going into the playoffs. This team under Dave Hextall, and it's no criticism on him. I think he's been handcuffed by the roster he's been given. Just hasn't stepped up to the play. Actually, they did. I'm sorry. The first year under Hextall, they did. They took the Rangers to 7 games, or some team to 7 games in the opening year, only to lose to the Rangers or the Capitals. And they should have maybe won the series, but that was surprising how far he got a team that was clearly not talented to even get to the playoffs. But anyway, people are all excited, and that's what you do in the beginning of the season. But this is what the Flyers do every year. They go out west. The NHL likes to put them out west because I guess they're a nice opening draw for a West Coast team. They get they have a good stretch, and then they have a good stretch for months, and then they go into tailspin for months, and then they go I don't know. I just can't get behind them. I love them. They're my favorite team. I'm going to root for them. I also root for them because they have a couple of Czechs on their team in Voracek. Probably the best player in the world that is a Czech. Gudas, who takes bad penalties. I like his style of play, but he takes bad penalties. And then, of course, Neuwirth, who's obviously from Czech Republic as well. Sixers, we'll see what they got. I don't think they improved much from last year. They're relying upon a rookie who had very huge confidence issues, a second-year player, Markelle Fultz, to come in and be a key contributor. I hope Markelle can be. I don't want to give up on him yet. I think it's wrong. But otherwise, they're going to be the same team as last year, and I think the teams within their conference, both Toronto and Boston, are the top of the conference, and they both got better. Toronto gets better by trading for Kawhi Leonard, who was rumored to come to the Sixers, amongst other teams. And I think Boston's better because they get a full season of Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward that are healthy. People forget that Boston team that beat the Sixers were playing without their top two best players. And I think that's going to be a major issue for the Sixers. And Ben Simmons has to develop some sort of offensive game outside of layups, put-back dunks, and assists. He just has to. If he does not show that he can be a consistent, reliable jump shooter, even if it's from the elbow out, the same thing's going to happen to the Sixers. They're going to go into the playoffs. Teams are going to scheme around Ben Simmons' offensive inefficiency, and they're going to get beat. It's been Matt Kwasiborski's show. It's been a long show today. It's been a long time since I did a podcast. Like I said, the focus has been on mental preparation, mental strength, and confidence. The Eagles right now have no confidence in their defense to stop the Minnesota Vikings this week. I think the Phillies just played with absolutely no mental strength, preparation, or they gave up on their manager and their season throughout the second half of September once they fell out of contention. The Flyers are a team that, again, needs to learn how to step up, and the Sixers need to take that next step as well. And maybe I need to step up with my goddamn podcasting and doing more than every 4 weeks. Thank you very much for those that listen. Thanks to my loyal listeners. Thanks to the internet. And have a wonderful day out there. Remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you.